The sky above the capital city of Iridia was not blue, nor was it a bruised purple of dusk. It was the color of iron, choked by a swarm of surveillance drones that buzzed like a plague of mechanical locusts. They hovered in tight mathematical formations, their lenses swiveling to capture every angle of the colossal broadcast arena below. This was the Unity Plaza, a bowl of white stone and polished steel capable of holding 200,000 citizens. Today, every seat was filled. The roar of the crowd was a physical weight, a rhythmic chant that vibrated through the floor of the holding cell, beneath the stage. They were screaming for justice. They were screaming for blood. Marcus Valerius sat on the edge of his cot, listening to the muffled thunder of his own death sentence. He did not look like a man about to die. He looked like a man waiting for a delayed transport. His hands, scarred and thick with callus, rested loosely on his knees. The standard-issue prisoner-grade jumpsuit fit poorly over his broad shoulders, tight across the chest where a dozen medals had once hung. 3 months ago, Marcus had been the poster boy for the Terran Federation expansion. He was the hero of the border wars, the man who had secured the crystal moons of Sector 7. Now, according to the 300-foot holographic screens dominating the city skyline, he was the butcher of Carwell, a traitor, a man who had sabotaged the glorious peace talks to line his own pockets with off-world currency. It was a lie, of course, but in the Federation, the truth was not what happened. The truth was whatever the Ministry of Information decided to broadcast between the weather report and the sports scores. The heavy magnetic lock on his cell door hissed and disengaged. A guard stepped in. It was Jensen, a man with a soft face and tired eyes who had been bringing Marcus his nutrient paste for the last 3 weeks. Jensen looked more terrified than the prisoner. He kept glancing at the camera in the corner of the ceiling. "Time to go, Valerius," Jensen said, his voice cracking slightly. Marcus stood up. He stretched his neck, hearing the vertebrae pop. "Is it a full house out there, Jensen?" Marcus asked. Jensen nodded, swallowing hard. "The numbers are record-breaking. They say half the system is tuning in. The High Chancellor wants everyone to see this." Marcus smirked. It was a grim, humorless expression that did not reach his eyes. They always like a show. It keeps them from asking why the grain rations are half the size they were last year. Jensen stepped back to let Marcus pass into the corridor. 2 elite peacekeepers, armored in white plastoid that made them look like faceless statues, fell in behind him. They did not speak. They simply leveled their shock rifles at his spine. As they walked down the long, sterile hallway toward a lift that would raise him to the execution platform, Jensen walked beside him, struggling with protocol. "You have a right to a final statement," Jensen mumbled, reciting the regulation. "And the final request within reason. No transport, no communications." "I know the rules," Marcus said. He stopped walking just before the lift doors. The peacekeepers tensed, fingers tightening on triggers. Marcus turned to Jensen. "I submitted my request to the tribunal this morning. Did they approve it?" Jensen looked down at his data pad. He frowned. "It is highly irregular, Valerius. The ministry thinks it is a joke. They think you are trying to mock the dignity of the court." "Dignity," Marcus repeated. He looked at the white armor of the peacekeepers, then back to the nervous guard. "I am being executed for a crime the High Admiral committed. I think we are past dignity. Did they approve it or not?" Jensen tapped the screen. "They approved it. The director of broadcasting thinks it will make for excellent theater." He called his symbol of Federation dominance over the primitive. Marcus exhaled a long, slow breath that seemed to empty his lungs of all the stale prison air. "Good. That is all I need." "What is it?" Jensen asked, looking at the file again, puzzled by the code. "What is Subject 7? Marcus stepped into the lift. He looked straight ahead as the doors began to slide shut. "Not a what, Jensen? A who?" The lift rose rapidly, the sensation of gravity increasing threefold. Above him, the noise of the crowd grew from a rumble to a deafening roar. Marcus closed his eyes and let the darkness take him back. He needed to be back there just for a moment to remember why he was standing here. He was back on the frozen frontier of the rim worlds. The wind there did not just blow, it cut. It was a jagged landscape of ice spires and black rock where the Federation maintained its black site laboratories. He had been leading a sweep and clear mission. The intel said rebels had taken over a research station. The intel was wrong. The station had not been taken by rebels. It had been breached by its own experiments. Marcus remembered the smell of the corridor, burnt wiring, copper blood, and the musk of something wild. His squad had been dead before they hit the ground, torn apart by shadows that moved faster than the human I could track. Marcus had cornered the beast in the main reactor room. It was huge, standing nearly 5 feet at the shoulder, with the color of starless night and eyes that burned with pale violet luminescence. It was wolf-like, but no wolf born of nature had plating of biological armor fused to its spine or a neural harness drilled directly into its skull. He had his rifle aimed at its heart. The creature was wounded, bleeding a glowing blue fluid from a gash in its flank. It snarled, a sound that vibrated in Marcus's teeth. Then a voice had cut through the freezing air. "Do not shoot." Marcus had spun around, weapon raised. Standing on the catwalk above was a woman. She wore a white lab coat stained with soot and grime. Her hair was stark white, pulled back in a severe knot, and her eyes were sharp, cold, and utterly terrifying. "That is Federation property. Commander," she had said, her voice calm despite the carnage around them. "If you damage it, the cost will come out of your pension." Marcus had looked from the woman to the beast. "It killed my men," Marcus had shouted. "No," she corrected him, walking down the stairs with data pad in hand. "The programming killed your men. The animal is just the hardware." She walked right past him, stepping between the barrel of his rifle and the snarling monster. Marcus watched in disbelief as she held out a hand. She did not flinch when the creature snapped its jaws inches from her fingers. "He is afraid," she said softly. She looked at Marcus then. That was the first time he had truly seen Dr. Elena Rostova. She was beautiful in the way a glacier is beautiful, impressive, dangerous, and cold. "You are a soldier," she said. "You follow orders." "So does he. Do you blame the rifle for the bullet?" Marcus lowered his weapon. The logic was cold, but it held. The creature had collapsed then, the adrenaline fading. Marcus had helped her carry the massive weight of the beast to the med bay. Over the next 3 weeks waiting for extraction, Marcus had spent every shift in that bay. He watched Elena work. She was a xenobiologist, a handler for the Federation's living weapon program, but she hated it. He saw in the way she touched the creature when she thought the cameras were off. She didn't treat it like hardware. She treated it like a victim. One night, during a blizzard that buried the station in 20 feet of snow, they shared a bottle of synthetic whiskey. "His name is not Subject 7, she had told him, her eyes glassy with drink and fatigue. "What is it?" Marcus asked. She leaned in, whispering as if the walls had ears. "The natives of this moon call them ghost stalkers. They are telepathic, bonding packs. The Federation staples these harnesses to their brains to force obedience, to make them kill on command. But underneath the code, he is still in there." Marcus looked at the sleeping wolf. Can he be saved? Elena looked at Marcus, and for a moment, the ice in her eyes cracked. Only if someone is willing to be torn apart to do it. The lift stopped with a heavy thud. The doors opened, and the light blinded him. Marcus stepped out onto the execution platform. It was a circular dais raised 50 feet above the arena floor. The noise hit him like a physical blow. 200,000 people screaming traitor and death. He blinked against the glare of the spotlights. He saw the high tribunal seated in a luxury box to his right, draped in red velvet and gold. He saw the drones dipping low, their cameras zooming in to catch the sweat on his brow. He did not sweat. He walked to the center of the platform where the magnetic shackles waited. He placed his wrists in them. They clamped shut with a mechanical whine, locking him in place. A silence fell over the arena, engineered by the master of ceremonies. A booming voice echoed from the speakers. "Citizens of the Federation, we stand today to witness justice." The crowd roared again, then hushed. "Marcus Valerius, once a captain, now a disgrace. You have been sentenced to termination for crimes against the state. Do you have any final word before the sentence is carried out?" Marcus looked up at the camera drone hovering 3 feet from his face. He saw his own reflection in the lens. He looked tired. "I have no words," Marcus said, his voice amplified across the city. "But I have a request." The High Adjudicator, a fat man with a beard that looked like oiled wire, leaned forward in a luxury box. "The court has granted this request." The Adjudicator boomed, sounding bored. "Let it be shown that the Federation is merciful, even to dogs. Bring out the beast." The massive blast doors of the far end of the arena ground opened. From the darkness of the tunnel, a creature emerged. It was magnificent and terrifying. It moved with a liquid grace, muscles rippling under that shimmered like oil on water. It was the size of a small transport vehicle, its paws silent on the white stone. A heavy neural harness was clamped around its neck, glowing with malevolent red light. Chains thick as a man's arm trailed from the harness, held by 4 handlers in armored suits. It was the wolf from the ice moon, but it looked wrong. Its eyes were wild, darting frantically. It was emaciated, its ribs showing through the silver-black fur. Marcus felt a sharp pang in his chest. They had starved him. The handlers dragged the wolf toward the center of the arena. The creature snapped and snarled, pulling against the chains with enough force to drag the men across the stone. The crowd loved it. They cheered for the monster. They wanted to see it tear the traitor apart. "Wait!" The voice was not amplified, but it cut through the noise with razor-sharp precision. A figure stepped out from the shadows of the tunnel, walking behind the handlers. The crowd murmured. Who was this? It was a woman. She wore the high-collared silk robes of a royal custodian, a position of immense legal immunity. Her hair was no longer in a severe bun, but flowed down her back like a river of white gold. Elena. She walked with terrifying confidence, ignoring the jeers of the crowd. She walked straight to the handlers. "Release the chains," she ordered. The lead handler, a man with a shock baton, laughed. "Lady, this is a Class 5 predator. If we release the chains, he eats everyone in the front row." I said, "Release them," Elena said. She held up a data slate. "By order of the Interspecies Ethics Treaty, Section 42, Subsection 9, I lay claim to this biological asset as its primary genetic custodian. The animal is under my command." The High Adjudicator stood up in his box. "This is highly irregular. Who is this woman?" Elena looked up at the box. Her face was projected onto the giant screens. She was stunning, and the camera loved her. "I am Dr. Elena Rostova, former lead xenobiologist of the Frontier Division, and I am exercising my right to oversee the final interaction between the prisoner and the asset, unless the High Adjudicator wishes to violate a treaty that keeps the Trade Federation from blockading our food supplies." The threat hung in the air. The Federation needed the trade routes. They could not afford a diplomatic incident over a dog show. The Adjudicator sat down, his face purple. "Allow it," he hissed. "But if that beast kills anyone other than the prisoner, execute the woman, too." Elena turned back to the handlers. "Go." The handlers looked at each other, then unclipped the heavy chains. They backed away slowly, weapons raised. The wolf was loose. Marcus stood frozen in his shackles. He watched the wolf. He watched Elena. She did not look at the wolf. She looked at him. Their eyes met across the 50 feet of white stone. In that look, there was 3 years of silence. There was the memory of the whiskey in the med bay. There was the heat of an argument they had the night he left, where she told him he was a fool for trusting the command, and he told her she was a cynic who believed in nothing. She looked different, harder, but her eyes were still the same, intelligent and burning with a secret fire. She nodded, a microscopic movement. The wolf turned its massive head. It saw Marcus. The red light on its collar pulsed faster. The aggression protocols were spiking. The crowd went silent, anticipating the lunge. "Kill!" The Adjudicator shouted into the microphone. The wolf charged. It crossed the arena floor in 3 seconds, a blur of black motion. Marcus did not flinch. He did not close his eyes. He watched his death coming. The wolf launched itself into the air, jaws open, teeth gleaming like obsidian daggers. The crowd screamed in delight, but the jaws did not snap shut. The wolf landed with heavy impact, its front paws hitting Marcus's chest, pinning him against the pillar of the shackles. But instead of tearing out his throat, the creature let out a low, mournful whine. It pressed its massive forehead against Marcus's chest. It rubbed its face against the rough fabric of the prison jumpsuit, smelling him, recognizing him. Marcus leaned his head forward, resting his forehead against the beast's snout. "Hello, boy," Marcus whispered. The wolf made a sound that was halfway between a growl and a purr. It refused to attack. It stood on its hind legs, its paws on his shoulders, shielding him from the cameras. The crowd was confused. This was not the blood sport they had been promised. In the luxury box, the adjudicator was screaming, "Override the caller. Shock it. Make it kill him." Elena was moving while the arena watched the wolf. She had closed the distance. She stepped up to the dais, moving into the shadow of the beast. She stood next to Marcus. She smelled of expensive perfume and ozone. "You always were dramatic, Marcus," she murmured, not moving her lips. "You took your time," he replied, looking at the wolf, not her. "Traffic was terrible," she said. She reached out ostensibly to pull the wolf away. Her hand brushed Marcus's shackled wrist. He felt a sharp prick, then a cold sensation sliding under the metal of the cuff. A data shard. "Hold this," she whispered. "Do not lose it. It contains the flight logs from the peace talks. The ones they said were destroyed." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. "You kept them." "I stole them," she corrected, "and they are going to kill us for it." The wolf suddenly stiffened. The red light on its collar turned a solid, blinding crimson. "They are overriding the safety," Elena said, her voice losing its cool edge. The wolf threw its head back. It did not attack Marcus. It did not attack Elena. It opened its jaws and howled. It was not a sound of nature. It was a sound of mechanics and biology screaming in unison. The howl hit a frequency that human ears could barely register. But it was agony. Glass shattered in the luxury box. The hovering drones began to wobble. Their navigation lights flickered. The giant screen surrounding the arena distorted, the image of the traitor dissolving into static and jagged lines of code. One by one, the iron insects fell from the sky, crashing into the stands. The broadcast feed cut out. The arena plunged into chaos. And in the center of the storm, the wolf stood guard, its violet eyes glowing, waiting for the command that would change everything. The static on the giant screens did not last. The Federation's redundancy systems kicked in with a mechanical screech, rerouting power from the city grid to stabilize the broadcast. The image flickered back to life, showing the chaotic scene on the execution platform, the traitor standing unbound, the woman in her shimmering robes, and the massive alien wolf bristling with lethal energy. "Kill them!" the high adjudicator shrieked, his voice cracking over the arena speakers. "Kill them all immediately. Cut the feed." The four handlers who had released the chains raised their shock rifles. They were professionals trained to put down rebellious biological assets, but they hesitated. They were not looking at an animal. They were looking at a storm trapped in fur and muscle. Elena did not flinch. She tapped a sequence into the jewel bracelet on her left wrist. It looked like a simple adornment, a ruby set in platinum, but it was a disguised transmitter broadcasting on a dead frequency. "Wake up," she whispered. The red light on the wolf's collar blinked out. For a microsecond, the harness went dark. Then it flared a brilliant, piercing white. The override code Elena had spent 3 years hunting down, a ghost string of numbers deleted from the central archives, slammed into the collar's receiver. It did not just disable the shock mechanism. It unlocked the limiter on the creature's nervous system. The wolf moved to the human eye. It was a blur. To Marcus, whose reflexes were honed by decades of frontier warfare, it was poetry. The creature did not lunge with the clumsy aggression of a beast. It flowed. It dropped low, sweeping its tail to knock the legs out from under the first handler. As the mun fell, the wolf spun, snapping the barrel of the second handler's rifle with a single precise bite. There was no blood. The wolf was not mauling. It was disarming. It tossed the third handler into fourth with the casual ease of a child discarding a toy. On the dais, the minister of protocol, a man whose entire career had been built on the precise measurement of bowing angles and ceremonial ribbon cutting, stood frozen. He looked at the wolf, which was now panting softly 3 feet away from him. The creature looked up, its violet eyes boring into the man's soul. The minister made a high squeaking sound, clutched his chest, and fainted dead away, his silk robes billowing around him like a deflated parachute. It was a moment of absurdity in the center of a nightmare. Marcus felt a hand on his arm. "Stop admiring the view," Elena said. Her voice was tight, vibrating with adrenaline. She grabbed his wrist. She twisted the large sapphire ring on her right hand, and a focused laser beam, no thicker than a hair, shot out. With surgical precision, she sliced through the magnetic lock of his shackles. The metal clattered to the white stone floor. Marcus rubbed his wrists, the sensation of freedom rushing through him like an intoxicant. "You are full of surprises, Elena," he said, his voice rough. "We're leaving," she snapped. 7 on me." The wolf, 7, fell into step beside her. Instantly the crowd in the stands was in an uproar, a mix of panic and thrill-seeking hysteria. Drones were beginning to circle back, their weapons charging. "Where are we going?" Marcus asked, dodging a stun blast that scorched a stone near his foot. "Down," Elena said. She led them not toward the tunnel, but to the edge of the platform. Beneath the execution dais was a ventilation chasm, a sheer drop of 200 feet into the industrial bowels of the city. "Trust me?" she asked, looking at him. "Do I have a choice?" Marcus replied, "No." She jumped. Marcus cursed and followed her. The wolf leaped after them, a dark comet against the gray air. They landed on a heavy mesh safety net 50 feet down, the impact knocking the wind out of Marcus. He rolled instinctively, checking for broken bones. Elena was already moving, scrambling off the net onto a rusted service catwalk. The wolf landed with a grace that defied physics, barely shaking the mesh. They were in the Undercity now. The air here tasted of recycled ozone, burnt grease, and the metallic tang of old coolant. Huge pipes large enough to drive a transport truck wound through the darkness like the intestines of a giant machine. The roar of the arena was a dull throb above them. "This way," Elena commanded, pulling a small glow rod from her robes. They ran. Marcus fell into a rhythm he had not used in years, the steady ground-eating lope of deep reconnaissance. He watched Elena. She was not a soldier, but she moved with a desperate determination, hiking up her expensive robes to sprint along the grating. "We have maybe 10 minutes before they lock down the sector," she called back over her shoulder. "Who is chasing us?" Marcus asked, his breath coming easily despite the exertion. "Standard peacekeepers," Elena laughed. A sharp, brittle sound. "I wish. The adjudicator has authorized the deployment of the Truth Knights." Marcus missed a step. He grabbed a railing to steady himself. "The Truth Knights? For a failed execution? That's excessive." "They're not here for you, Marcus," Elena said, taking a sharp left turn into a narrow maintenance tunnel. "They're here for the wolf." They ran for another mile, descending deeper into the city's roots. The pristine white stone of the capital was gone, replaced by dripping concrete and graffiti that glowed in the dark. Behind them, far up in the vertical shaft, a sound echoed. It was the heavy, rhythmic clang of magnetic boots on metal. Clang, clang, clang. It sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. "They're tracking the harness," Marcus said. "We need to cut it off him." "If we cut it off, his brain liquefies," Elena said, not slowing down. "It's fused to his brain stem." I jammed the tracking signal. But the Knights have thermal optics that can see a heat signature through 3 feet of lead. They burst into a large, cavernous space. It was an abandoned hollow theater from the pre-expansion era. Rows of dusty velvet seats stretched back into the darkness. On the stage, a malfunctioning projector was stuck in a loop, displaying a flickering, ghostly image of a happy family eating synthetic roast chicken. "In here," Elena hissed, pushing Marcus toward the back of the theater. They scrambled over the seats, ducking behind a heavy debris barrier formed by a collapsed balcony. The wolf curled up tight, making himself as small as possible. Marcus pressed his back against the cold wall, listening. The footsteps had stopped. He looked at Elena. She was trembling, not from fear, he realized, but from the crash of adrenaline. She was trying to unfasten her heavy ceremonial collar, her fingers fumbling with the clasp. "Let me," Marcus said. He reached out, his hand steady. He undid the clasp and pulled the heavy silk garment away, revealing a practical tactical suit worn underneath. She looked at him, her chest heaving. In the flickering light of the hollow projector, her face was pale, her eyes wide and dark. "Why did you do it?" Marcus asked, his voice low. "You had a life, Elena. You were safe. You were rich. Why throw it away for a dead man?" "I didn't do it for you," she whispered, defensive anger flashing in her eyes. "I did it because they were going to dissect him." She gestured to the wolf. Marcus looked at the beast. The wolf was watching them, its head resting on its paws. Its eyes moved back and forth between a man and the woman with an intelligence that was unsettling. "You risked execution for a lab experiment." Marcus asked. "He's not an experiment," Elena snapped. She moved closer to Marcus, crowding his personal space. "He's a person, Marcus. A person who happens to have 4 legs and fur, and he's the only one in this entire godforsaken city who has never lied to me." Marcus stared at her. They were close now, breathing the same stale air. The danger outside, the truth nights, the drones, the execution orders seemed to fade, replaced by the immediate magnetic pull of their history. He remembered the nights on the ice moon. He remembered the way she had looked at him when he boarded the transport ship, leaving her behind. He reached out, his hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His skin was rough against her smoothness. "You're a terrible liar, Dr. Elena Rostova," he said softly. "You came back for me, too." Elena did not pull away. Her breath hitched. She looked at his mouth, then up to his eyes. The tension between them was a physical force, a wire pulled so tight it hummed. "Maybe I just wanted to see if you were still as stubborn as I remembered," she murmured. Marcus leaned in, the distance between them close to inches. He could smell the fear on her, and beneath it, the scent of lavender and rain. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to kiss her more than he wanted to breathe. A heavy boom shook the theater. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The wolf growled, a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. Marcus pulled back, the soldier taking over the mun instantly. "They're sweeping the grid," he said, checking the power levels on the field cutter Elena had given him. "We can't stay here." Elena took a deep breath, composing herself. She smoothed her hair, the mask of the cool scientist sliding back into place. "You're right. We need to move. But first, you need to know what you're really caught up in." She pulled a small holographic projector from her belt and set it on the floor. A map of the galaxy sprang to life, hovering in the blue light. "The peace talks weren't sabotaged by you, Marcus. They were sabotaged by the Ares faction." Marcus frowned. The Ares faction was a myth, a rumored cabal of militarists within the Admiralty. "They're not a myth," Elena said, anticipating his doubt. "They're very real, and they need a war. The economy is stalling. The expansion is stopped. Without a new conflict, the military budget gets cut by 40%. They needed the peace talks to fail so they could justify annexing the neutral systems of the Veil Nebula." "And I was a convenient patsy," Marcus said, the pieces falling into place. "You were perfect," Elena said grimly. "A hero, a legend. If even Marcus Valerius could turn traitor, then the enemy must be truly insidious. It terrified the public. It made them beg for protection." She pointed to the wolf. "And this is their endgame. Subject 7. He's not just a wolf. He's a prototype for the Sentient Asset Division. They want to create an army of them. Creatures with the intelligence of a human tactical commander and the lethality of an apex predator." Marcus looked at the wolf. The creature blinked slowly. "But there was a flaw," Elena continued. "To make them smart enough to take complex orders, they had to leave the emotional centers of the brain intact. They tried to suppress it with the harness, but the biology fought back. The wolves went insane. They killed their handlers." "Except for him," Marcus said. "Except for him," Elena agreed, "because I did something illegal." She knelt beside the wolf, burying her hands in his thick fur. I used an empathic bonding ritual from the natives of the Ice Moon. The Federation banned it 200 years ago. It links two nervous systems. It creates a feedback loop of emotion. He stays sane because I anchor him. He feels what I feel. Marcus stared at her in shock. You bonded with him? That's considered witchcraft by the tribunal. It's science, Elena corrected. Just science they don't understand. If I die, he goes mad. If he dies, I probably suffer a massive cerebral hemorrhage. We're a package deal. Marcus sat back against the dusty seat. The magnitude of what she had done was staggering. She had tied her life to a beast to save it from madness. So that's your secret, he said. Now tell me mine. Elena looked at him, confused. What? You asked me why I surrendered, Marcus said. Why I let them call me a traitor without fighting back. I assumed they drugged you, Elena said, or threatened your family, but you have no family. I have a sister, Marcus said quietly. She runs an orphanage in the lower districts. The Ares faction took them. 40 children. They told me if I said a word in my defense, they would vend the orphanage's life support. Elena's hand went to her mouth. Oh, Marcus. I had to die. Elena, he said. It was the only way to ensure they would let the children go. But you didn't die, Elena said, her voice rising in panic. I stopped it. I ruined the deal. Marcus nodded grimly. Yes, which means the children are dead unless we can prove my innocence before the news cycle resets. The weight of the situation settled on them. They were not just running for their lives. They were running for 40 others. We need the original data, Elena said, her mind racing. The shard I gave you has the flight logs, but it's not enough. We need the biological records from a lab on the frontier. We need to prove that the Ares faction was breeding these wolves for war long before the peace talk began. The lab was destroyed, Marcus said. The physical lab was, Elena said, but the backup archive is on the moon of Neosin. It's a neutral archive world. The treaty logs and the black budget receipts are stored there in a hardened vault. Neosin is 3 light systems away, Marcus said. We have no ship. We have no credits. And every face scanner in the city is looking for us. Elena stood up. A dangerous smile played on her lips. It was the smile of the woman who had walked into a cage with a monster. We don't need credits, Marcus. We have you. You're the best infiltrator in the fleet. Can you steal a ship? Marcus stood up. He checked the charge on the field cutter. I can steal anything that flies. Getting to the spaceport was a lesson in terror. They moved through the sewers, wading through waist-deep sludge to avoid the patrols. The wolf hated the water, whining softly, but he stayed close to Elena's leg. They emerged in the cargo district of the orbital lift station. It was a forest of shipping containers and robotic loaders. The Truth Knights were close. Marcus could hear the whine of their heavy assault bikes echoing off the container walls. There, Marcus pointed, sitting on a launch pad, fueling up for a night run, was a sleek courier vessel. It was a Starling-class jumper, small, fast, and lightly armed. It has a biometric lock, Elena whispered as they crouched behind a crate of synthetic grain. And a pilot. Marcus picked up a heavy wrench from a discarded toolbox. I'll handle the pilot. You handle the lock. He moved before she could argue. Marcus slipped through the shadows, moving with a silence that made him seem like a ghost. He approached the pilot, who was checking the landing struts. One strike, precise, controlled. The pilot crumpled. Marcus caught him before he hit the ground and dragged him into the shadows. He waved Elena forward. She sprinted across the tarmac, the wolf at her heels. She reached the airlock. The panel glowed red. It's a DNA cipher, she cursed, her fingers flying over the keypad. Bypass it. I'm trying, Elena said. It's military-grade encryption. A spotlight swept over them. Hey! A voice shouted from the control tower. Halt! Alarms began to blare. The wail was deafening. Elena! Marcus shouted. I got it. The airlock hissed open. They threw themselves inside. The wolf scrambled in last, his claws sparking on the metal deck. Marcus slammed a manual override for the door. He jumped into the pilot seat. The controls were familiar. Standard Federation layout. "Strap in," he yelled. He punched the ignition sequence. The engines roared to life, a comforting vibration that shook the deck plates. Outside, the blast doors of the cargo bay were closing. The Truth Knights had arrived. 3 massive armor figures stood on the tarmac, leveling heavy cannons at the ship. "Hold on," Marcus gritted out. He threw the throttle forward. The ship lurched, tearing through the refueling hoses. Fuel sprayed onto the tarmac and ignited, creating a wall of fire between them and the Knights. The ship shot upward, screaming toward the sky. The G-force slammed Marcus back into his seat. He fought the stick, guiding them through the traffic lanes, dodging heavy freighters and advertising blimps. Warning. The ship's computer intoned, its voice calm and synthetic. Unsanctioned launch detected. Surface-to-air missiles locking on. "Flare countermeasures," Marcus ordered, his hands dancing over the console. The ship bucked as explosions blossomed behind them. Shrapnel pinged off the hull like hail. Elena was in the co-pilot seat, clutching the armrest until her knuckles were white. The wolf was strapped into the jump seat behind them, whining in distress. "We're punching through the atmosphere in 5 seconds," Marcus shouted. The sky turned from iron gray to black. The stars exploded into view. Silence. The engine roar smoothed out into a steady hum. They were in orbit. Marcus engaged the hyperdrive spool. "Course set for Neosin," he said, exhaling a breath he felt he had been holding for an hour. Elena leaned back, closing her eyes. "We made it." Marcus tapped the communication console. "Not quite. Look." He brought up the Federation news feed. The face on the screen was familiar. It was the High Adjudicator, looking disheveled but furious. "Citizens," he announced, his voice trembling with rage. "A dangerous terrorist cell has escaped custody. Marcus Valerius, the traitor Elena Rostova, the defecting scientist, and a rogue biological weapon. They are armed, unstable, and enemies of the state." A bounty amount flashed on the screen. It was a number so large it was meaningless to the average citizen. 50 million credits, dead or alive. The adjudicator's eyes burned into the camera. "If you see them, do not approach. Contact the authorities immediately. The Federation will not rest until these monsters are destroyed." Marcus turned off the screen. The cockpit was bathed in the soft blue light of the stars. "We're famous," he said dryly. Elena looked at him, then at the wolf, who had managed to free himself from the straps and was now resting his head on her shoulder. "We're not monsters," she whispered. "No," Marcus said, engaging the hyperdrive. The stars stretched into lines of light. "We're the only honest people left in the galaxy." The ship vanished into the void, leaving the Federation and its lives behind, but carrying the target on its back. The asteroid belt, known as the Devil's Rosary, was a graveyard of broken rocks and bad intentions. It was a chaotic swirl of debris orbiting a dying brown dwarf star, a place where the Federation's laws were treated as mild suggestions rather than absolute mandates. For Marcus Valerius, Elena Rostova, and the massive wolf known as Subject 7, it was the only place to hide. Their stolen courier ship, now repainted a dull, rusted orange to blend in with the mining traffic, drifted into the docking clamp of Station 4. The station was carved directly into a nickel-iron asteroid the size of a mountain. It was a hive of smugglers, disgraced corporate spies, and flesh peddlers. "We need fuel, heavy coolant for the engine, and identity scramblers," Marcus said, checking the charge on his stolen blaster. "And we need them without flagging the local Federation garrison." Elena stood by the airlock, adjusting the high collar of a velvet coat she had fabricated from the ship's emergency blankets and a few spare synthesizer cycles. She had transformed herself. She was no longer the fugitive scientist. She was a bored, dangerous aristocrat from the core systems, slumming in the outer rim for thrills. "Leave the talking to me," she said, applying a stripe of silver paint across her eyes. "You're just a hired muscle. Try to look large and stupid." Marcus grunted. "That shouldn't be difficult given how little I understand of your plan." 7 paced behind them. The wolf was agitated. His neural implant was sparking intermittently, sending small tremors through his massive frame. Elena had draped a heavy cloak over his back to hide the worst of the cybernetics, but nothing could hide the sheer size of him or the violet glow of his eyes. "He stays close," Elena commanded. "If anyone asks, he's a Canis Majoris show beast. Very expensive, very temperamental." The airlock hissed open, and the smells of the station hit them like a physical wall. Fried spices, unwashed bodies, and the acrid tang of recycled oxygen. They stepped out into the bazaar. The main promenade of Station 4 was a riot of noise and color. Holographic advertisements for cheap liquor and illegal genetic mods flickered in the smoky air. The crowd was a dense river of humanity and aliens pushing and shoving through the narrow corridors lined with stalls. Marcus walked a half-step behind Elena, his hand resting casually near the weapon concealed under his jacket. He scanned every face, every shadow. High above, hovering like annoying insects, were the facial recognition swarm drones. They were cheap models, erratic and buzzing, but dangerous enough that they got a clear lock on Marcus's jawline. "Keep your head down," Marcus murmured. Elena did the opposite. She lifted her chin, striding through the muck of the street with an imperious sneer. "If we act like we're hiding, they'll hunt us," she whispered back, not breaking her stride. "Predators don't hide, Marcus. They parade." She stopped at a stall selling identity chips. The vendor, a cybernetically enhanced mon with 3 mechanical eyes, looked them over with greedy calculation. "I need 3 grade A ghosts," Elena said, tossing a stolen credit chip onto the counter. "Clean slates, no backtrace." The vendor picked up the chip. "This is Federation military script," he said, his voice grating. "Hot money. Costs extra to wash it." Elena leaned forward. She did not look worried. She looked bored. "Don't bore me with arithmetic. Just give me the chips or my bodyguard will dismantle your stall, and then he will dismantle you." She gestured vaguely at Marcus. Marcus crossed his arms, letting his biceps bulge against the fabric of his flight suit. He gave the vendor a flat, dead-eyed stare that he had perfected during interrogations on the frontier. The vendor swallowed. He hurriedly swept the credit chip into a drawer and began encoding 3 blank slates. While the transaction took place, 7 became bored. The wolf had been tracking a scent for the last 100 yards. It was a rich, savory smell of roasting meat coming from a food cart directly across the aisle. The cart was piled high with skewers of lizard meat sizzling over an open plasma grill. 7 nudged Marcus's leg, but Marcus was focused on the vendor. 7 decided to handle the matter himself. The wolf padded silently across the aisle. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing the apex predator in their midst. 7 approached the food cart. The cook, a squat man with a greasy apron, had his back turned, arguing with a customer. 7 rose on his hind legs. He was taller than the cart. With delicate precision, he clamped his jaws around an entire rack of skewers, 20 pounds of spice meat, and pulled it free. The metal rack clattered. The cook spun around. "Hey!" The cook screamed, brandishing a spatula. "That beast stole my inventory." 7 dropped back to all fours, the rack of meat dangling from his mouth. He looked at the cook, then crunched down. Wood, metal, and meat vanished in 2 bites. The crowd went silent. Then someone laughed. "Look at the appetite on that thing," a miner shouted. Marcus spun around, his hand going for his gun, expecting a fight. Instead, he saw 7 licking his chops, looking incredibly pleased with himself. The cook was red-faced, raising his spatula to strike. 7 let out a low, vibrating growl. It was not loud, but it shook the dust off the overhead pipes. The cook froze, the spatula trembling in midair. Elena turned, her transaction complete. She saw the scene inside, a perfect dramatic exhalation of a weary noble woman. "Bad manners, darling," she drawled, addressing the wolf. She walked over to the terrified cook and flicked another credit chip onto his grill. It sizzled in the grease. "That should cover the lizard in the rack," she said. "Keep the change." The cook looked at the credit chip. It was worth more than his entire cart. "Thank you, my lady," he stammered. "A fine beast, a magnificent beast." The crowd cheered. They loved the show, and they loved seeing money thrown around. 7, realizing he was the center of attention, gave a short, sharp bark that sounded suspiciously like a laugh. "Let's move," Marcus hissed, grabbing Elena's elbow. "We're drawing a crowd." Elena smiled at him, her eyes dancing with a mix of adrenaline and amusement. "We're blending in, Marcus. No one looks for fugitives who are buying rounds of steak for the house." As they moved deeper into the station toward the engineering sector, Marcus found himself watching her. He watched the way the neon light caught the curve of her neck. He watched the confident sway of her hips that was half act and half Elena. He was a man who had spent his life dealing in cold facts and hard targets. He understood trajectories, blast radii, and extraction protocols. He did not understand the way his chest tightened when she laughed at danger. He was angry at her for risking their cover. But beneath the anger was a hunger he had been trying to bury since the ice moon. She was brilliant. She was terrifying. And she was the only thing in the galaxy that made him feel alive. "We're here," Elena said, stopping in front of a rusted blast door marked with a biohazard symbol. "This isn't a shop," Marcus said. "This is a condemnation notice." "It's a chop shop for illegal cybernetics," Elena corrected. "And 7 needs a tune-up." She placed her hand on the panel. It sparked, then slid open. The interior was dark, smelling of antiseptic and old blood. It was empty, save for a robotic surgical arm hanging from the ceiling. Elena wasted no time. She swept a pile of dirty rags off a metal table. "Get him up here," she ordered. Marcus signaled 7. The wolf jumped onto the table, the metal groaning under his weight. 7 was fading. The burst of energy from the skewers had worn off, and now the creature was shivering, his eyes rolling back in his head. The neural override Elena had used to save him was burning out his synapses. "I need to reset the governor chip," Elena said, her hands flying as she pulled tools from a nearby tray. "If I don't stabilize the voltage, his brain will cook." She looked at Marcus. Her aristocratic mask was gone. She was a scientist again, focused and intense. "I need you to hold the shunt here." She guided his hand to a port at the base of the wolf's skull. "It's going to get hot," she warned. "Don't let go. If the connection breaks while I'm rewriting the code, he dies." "Do it," Marcus said. Elena activated a laser cutter. She made a precise incision in the wolf's neck. 7 whimpered, his legs thrashing. "Hold him." Elena shouted over the whine of the laser. Marcus pressed his weight against the wolf's shoulders, using his free hand to soothe the beast. "Easy, 7. Easy. We're here." The smell of ozone filled the small room. Marcus felt the heat building in the shunt under his fingers. It burned, searing his skin, but he did not flinch. He watched Elena's face. She was inches from him, her brow furrowed in concentration, sweat beading on her upper lip. She was working with impossible speed, splicing microscopic fibers with a steady hand. "Almost there," she whispered. "Just one more bridge." Sparks showered down on them. 7 let out a howl that was cut short as the new code took hold. The wolf's body went rigid, then relaxed completely. The violet light in his eyes dimmed to a steady, calm pulse. Elena dropped the laser cutter. She slumped against the table, gasping for air. "It's done," she said. "He's stable." Marcus let go of the shunt. His hand was blistered, red, and raw. He did not care. He looked at Elena. She was shaking. The adrenaline dump was hitting her hard. She slid down to the floor, sitting with her back against the metal leg of the table. "Give me a minute," she murmured. "Just a minute." Marcus sat down beside her. The room was quiet, save for the rhythmic breathing of the sleeping wolf. He looked at his burned hand, then at Elena. Her eyes were closed, her head lolling to the side, resting on his shoulder. He froze. He was a soldier trained to move, to strike, to evade. He did not know how to be a pillow, but he did not move away. He adjusted his posture slightly, making a hollow for her head. She smelled of the cheap chemicals from the station air, but underneath that, she still smelled like herself, like snow and sterile labs and something warm and human. He sat there in the darkness, guarding her sleep with more ferocity than he had ever guarded the Federation's borders. It was a fragile piece, a stolen moment in a universe that wanted them dead. He knew that if he moved, if he spoke, the reality of their situation would come crashing back in. So, he stayed still. 20 minutes later, Elena stirred. She did not jump or startle. She simply opened her eyes and lifted her head, rubbing her neck. She looked at Marcus. She saw the way he was sitting, stiff as a board, afraid to disturb her. A small smile touched her lips. "You have a terrible hero complex, Marcus Valerius," she said, her voice raspy with sleep. "You think if you move a muscle, the sky will fall." "I was just resting my eyes," Marcus lied. "You were guarding the perimeter of a nap," she teased. Her smile faded. She looked at his hand. "You're burned." "It's nothing." She reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cool against his inflamed skin. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small tin of medical salve. Gently, she applied it to the burn. The pain vanished, replaced by a cool numbness. "Why did you never write?" she asked, not looking up from his hand. "After the frontier, 3 years, Marcus. Not one message." Marcus watched her fingers working the salve into his skin. "I thought you were part of the job," he said quietly. "I thought if I contacted you, I would be admitting that the mission never really ended for me." "And now," she asked, looking up, "now I know the mission was the only thing that mattered." The air in the room changed. It became heavy, charged with the same electricity that had sparked from the wolf's collar. There were 2 broken people in a dirty room on an asteroid, holding hands over a jar of salve. Marcus leaned in. He saw the question in her eyes. He saw the fear and the want. He wanted to kiss her. He wanted to pull her into him and forget the bounty, the Federation, and the war. But then 7 shifted on the table, a metal clamp clanking against the surface. The sound broke the spell. Marcus pulled back. Elena cleared her throat, standing up quickly and smoothing her fabricated velvet coat. "We have the fuel," she said, her voice brisk, trying to cover the tremble. "We have the scramblers. We should go." Marcus stood up. He felt the loss of her touch like a cold wind. Right to Neosin. The flight to the archive moon of Neosin was tense. They spoke only of navigation vectors and fuel consumption, avoiding the silence that hung between them. Neosin was a dead world. It had no atmosphere, no life, only miles of gray dust and the massive windowless structures of the Federation archives. It was where the Federation buried its history, literally. The archives were deep underground vaults, colder than a grave. They landed the courier ship in a blind crater 2 miles from a main entrance. The identity scramblers worked. The orbital defense grid ignored them as just another automated debris hauler. They entered the facility through an emergency exhaust vent Elena knew about from her time in the service. The corridors were white, sterile, and silent. "We need the Vault of Treaties," Elena whispered, checking her wrist computer. "Level 9. They descended. 7 moved like a ghost. His claws retracted to avoid clicking on the pristine floors. The vault was a massive circular room lined with crystal data shards. In the center sat a single terminal. Elena plugged the shard Marcus had carried, the flight logs, into the terminal. She began cross-referencing it with the archive's biological database. The screen flash read, "File corrupted." The computer stated, "Data purged by order of High Command." "They wiped it," Elena said, slamming her fist against console. "They knew we would come here. They erased the proof that the Wolf program predates the peace talks." "Not all of it," a voice croaked from the shadows. Marcus spun, weapon raised. 7 growled. An old man stepped out from behind a stack of data towers. He wore the dusty robes of a junior archivist. He looked terrified. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded. "I am Silas," the Mun said, holding up his hands. I saw them do it. The true knights. They came 3 days ago. They burned the physical backups. Why are you still alive?" Elena asked, stepping forward. Silas trembled. "I hid. I knew someone might come looking. The Ares faction, they're monsters. I saw the orders, the sabotage of the peace talks, the framing of Captain Valerius. It was all signed by Admiral Krennic. You saw the signature? Marcus asked. I did. I can testify. I can. The old man's head snapped back. There was no sound of a gunshot, just a wet thud as Silas collapsed, a smoking hole in the center of his forehead. Sniper. Marcus roared. He tackled Elena, throwing her to the ground behind the terminal. Seven leaped over them, shielding them with his armored body. A shimmering distortion in the air at the far end of the vault revealed a team of Federation Spectres, stealth commandos in active camouflage suits. They had been waiting. They decloaked, raising high-velocity rail rifles. We're pinned, Marcus shouted, returning fire blindly over the console. Elena was frantically typing on the terminal. We don't have the witness, Marcus yelled. We have nothing. We have the data, Elena screamed back. How? It's corrupted. Not the archive, Elena said, her eyes wild. The backup, the illegal code I used on 7. It opened a partition in his biomori. The archive computer was trying to sync with him. She grabbed the cable from the terminal and jammed it into the port on 7's neck. Download it, she commanded the wolf. 7 roared, his eyes glowing so bright they illuminated the entire vault. The data, terabytes of hidden biological records, financial trails, and military orders, streamed from the terminal directly into the wolf's organic brain. 7 was the hard drive. Done. Elena yanked the cable free. Run. Marcus threw a thermal detonator over the console. It exploded in a blinding flash of white phosphorus, buying them 3 seconds of confusion. They sprinted. They ran through the white corridors, rail rounds tearing chunks out of the walls around them. 7 took the lead, bowling over a specter who tried to block the exit. They burst out of the airlock into the vacuum of the moon's surface. Their environment suits sealed instantly. They bounded across the gray dust toward the crater where their ship waited. Launch! Marcus screamed into his comms as they scrambled up the ramp. He hit the cockpit, slamming the throttle forward before the ramp was even fully closed. The ship lurched into the sky. Warning. The ship's computer droned. Hull integrity compromised. 3 interceptors on pursuit vector. The stars outside the viewport were replaced by the angry red streaks of laser fire. The ship shook violently. Shields are down to 20%. Elena yelled from the co-pilot seat. They're hurting us, Marcus realized, looking at the tactical display. They're pushing us toward the nebula. No, Elena said, pointing at the scanner. They're pushing us toward that. Looming ahead of them was a planet of swirling white and gray clouds. It looked like a bruised eye in the darkness of space. Planet Nibelheim, the computer identified. Class 4 ice world. Atmospheric storms exceeding Category 5. They're trying to force a crash, Marcus said. They know they can't blow us up without destroying the data in the Wolf. A heavy impact rocked the ship. The starboard engine exploded. The ship screamed, spiraling into an uncontrollable spin. We're going down. Marcus shouted, wrestling with the yoke. Gravity is taking us. Hold on to 7, Elena screamed, unbuckling her straps to throw her arms around the terrified wolf. The viewports filled with white, blinding snow. The scream of the atmosphere tearing at the hull drowned out all thought. Marcus locked his eyes on the altimeter as it unwound toward 0. Brace for impact. The world turned white, then black as they slammed into the ice. The world was white. It was a blinding, suffocating white that screamed. Marcus Valerius woke to the sensation of being dragged. His body felt like a collection of shattered glass held together by a flight suit. He tried to breathe, but the air was a solid wall of ice crystals that scoured his throat. He coughed, and the sound was lost instantly in the roar of the wind. He was moving across the snow, but he was not walking. Something had him by the collar of his thermal jacket. He tilted his head back, the movement sending a spike of agony down his spine. Above him, a massive silver-black shape cut through the blizzard. Subject 7. The wolf was trudging through hip-deep snow drifts, his head lowered against the gale, pulling Marcus with strength that was terrifying in its persistence. Marcus tried to speak, but his jaw was frozen shut. He looked to his left. A few yards away, Elena Rostova was stumbling forward, one hand gripping the wolf stick for balance. She looked like a ghost, her face pale inside the hood of her environment suit, her eyes squinting against the stinging ice. They were alive. The ship was gone, a smoking crater a mile back, swallowed by the storm. Now there was only Nibelheim. The planet was a graveyard of ambition. Through the swirling Y-date, Marcus could see the skeletal remains of abandoned structures, geothermal processing towers that had been stripped and left to rot centuries ago. The wind howled through them, creating a mournful, atonal symphony. 7 stopped. The wolf dropped Marcus gently onto a patch of hard ice. The creature turned, his violet eyes glowing like beacons in the gloom. He barked, a sound that cut through the wind, and nudged Marcus toward a low-metallic dome half buried in a drift. It was an old research outpost, its hull pitted and scarred by generations of storms. Elena fell to her knees beside the airlock, her fingers clumsy with cold as she punched in a universal override code. "Come on," she hissed, her voice barely audible over the commotion. "Open, you rusted piece of junk." The hydraulics groaned, a sound like a dying beast, and the heavy door cracked open. A blast of stale, relatively warm air hit them. 7 grabbed Marcus's collar again and dragged him inside. Elena scrambled in after them and slammed the manual seal. The silence was sudden and absolute. The wind was cut off. The screaming white was replaced by the dim red emergency lighting of the airlock. Marcus tried to sit up and failed. The room spun. "Stay down," Elena ordered. She was already stripping off her gloves, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "Get his jacket off. We need to check the damage." The wolf moved with surprising gentleness. He used his teeth to unzip the heavy thermal layer, peeling it back to reveal the undersuit soaked in dark blood. Marcus looked down at his side. A piece of shrapnel from the cockpit console had punched through the armor mesh, lodging itself just below his ribs. "That looks expensive," Marcus croaked. "Don't joke," Elena snapped, tearing open a medical kit she had salvaged from the wreckage. "You're bleeding internally. If the spleen is ruptured, you're dead in 20 minutes. She worked with a terrifying focus. Her aristocratic persona was gone, replaced by the surgeon who had stitched monsters back together. She injected a coagulant directly into the wound, her face set in a grim mask. 7 paced a small metal room, his claws clicking on the floor. He would stop every few seconds to nudge Marcus's hand or press his nose against Elena's shoulder, whining softly. He was checking their vitals, his empathy field reading their pain and fear. "It's deep," Elena whispered, mostly to herself. "I have to seal it." She pulled out a dermal stapler and a canister of biofoam. "This is going to hurt, Marcus." "I've had worse," he lied. "No, you haven't," she said. She pressed the nozzle into the wound. Marcus gritted his teeth so hard he thought they would crack. The pain was a blinding white flash, hotter than the entry of the shrapnel. He did not scream, but a guttural sound escaped his throat. 7 let out a sharp howl, feeling the pain as if it were his own. The wolf rushed over, lying down across Marcus's legs, offering his body heat and a heavy, grounding weight. Elena worked for an hour. When she was finished, her hands were covered in his blood. She slumped back against the curved wall of the dome, exhausted. "He'll live," she said to the wolf. 7 rested his head on Marcus's chest, his breathing slowing down to match the man's rhythm. Marcus drifted in and out of consciousness. He dreamed of the ice moon, of the execution platform, and of Elena standing in the snow with a bottle of whiskey. When he woke, the red emergency lights had been replaced by a soft, pulsating blue glow. He turned his head. The dome had a viewing port made of reinforced plastic glass. Outside, the storm had broken, revealing a sky set on fire. The aurora of Nibelheim was not like the gentle lights of Earth. It was violent, bands of neon purple, bruised magenta, and toxic green thrashing across the stars. It looked like the universe was bruising itself. Elena was sitting by a small heating unit she had managed to activate. She was staring at the lights, her profile sharp and lonely against the alien sky. "You're staring again," Marcus rasped. Elena turned. Her face softened, the hard lines of stress smoothing out. "You're awake." She crawled over to him, checking the biofoam seal on his side. Her touch was clinical, professional, but her fingers lingered on his skin a second longer than necessary. "How is the patient?" she asked. "Alive, thanks to you." She sat back on her heels, wrapping her arms around herself. The dome was cold, the heater struggling against the ambient temperature of 40 degrees below zero. "We're stuck here, Marcus," she said quietly. "The ship is gone. The comms are fried, and we have half a crate of emergency rations." Marcus tried to sit up, wincing as his side pulled. Seven immediately moved to support his back, acting as a living cushion. "What kind of rations?" Marcus asked. Elena made a face. "Nutrient paste, flavor, unflavored, and something that claims to be dried peach but smells like wet cardboard." Marcus managed a dry chuckle. "I prefer the cardboard. It has more texture." Elena laughed. It was a small, fragile sound, but it pushed back the darkness of the dome. "You're impossible. We're stranded on a frozen hellscape with the entire Federation fleet hunting us, and you're critiquing the menu." "Perspective, Elena," Marcus said. "At least we're not being broadcast on live television anymore." She looked at him, her eyes dark in the blue light of the aurora. "No, now we're just ghosts." She reached into the crate and tossed him a foil packet. "Eat. You lost a pint of blood. If you pass out again, I'm letting Seven eat you." "I think he prefers the skewers," Marcus said, tearing open the packet. They ate in silence. The only sound the hum of the heater and the wind picking up again outside. The shared hardship stripped away the pretenses they had held on to. There was no room for the soldier or the aristocrat here. There was only the man and the woman shivering in the dark. Elena finished her paste and moved closer to the heater. She was shivering, violent tremors that shook her small frame. Marcus watched her. He saw the exhaustion in the slope of her shoulders. "Come here," he said. Elena looked at him. "I'm fine, Marcus." "You're freezing and the heater is dying. Body heat is simple physics. Elena, don't overthink it." She hesitated, then crawled over to him. She lay down beside him on the hard floor, careful of his injury. Seven shifted, draping his massive tail over both of their legs like a weighted blanket. Marcus wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her against him. She was stiff at first, holding herself apart, but the cold was relentless. Slowly, she melted. She buried her face in the curve of his neck, her cold nose pressing against his skin. They lay there for a long time, the heat of their bodies creating a small island of warmth in the freezing sea of the dome. "I hate the cold," Elena whispered into his neck. "I know," Marcus said. "I grew up on a tropical world. Prime Secundus. It was always summer. The ocean was so warm it felt like a bath." "I grew up in the ventilation shafts of a mining colony," Marcus said. "I didn't see the sun until I was 18. Elena pulled back slightly to look at him. Her eyes searched his face, tracing the scars, the lines of fatigue. "That's why you joined the service. To see the sky." "No, I joined because I was hungry, and because they promised me that if I fought for the Federation, I would matter." "And did you matter?" Marcus looked at the aurora swirling above them. "I was a very effective weapon. Weapons matter to the people holding them, but to the people being aimed at, I was just a catastrophe." Elena rested her hand on his chest over his heart. "You're not a weapon, Marcus. You're the man who stopped to save a wolf. You're the man who let himself be executed to save 40 orphans." She moved her hand up to his jaw, her thumb brushing his cheek. "You're the only good thing I found in this galaxy." Marcus's breath caught. The air in the dome suddenly felt very thin. "Elena," he warned softly. She did not stop. She leaned in, her eyes locking onto his. "I'm tired of being afraid, Marcus. I'm tired of running and hiding and pretending that I don't feel this." "Feel what?" "This." She closed the gap. Her lips were cold, chapped from the wind, but her mouth was fire. It was not a tentative kiss. It was desperate. It tasted of fear and adrenaline and 3 years of unspoken longing. Marcus froze for a heartbeat, his mind warring with his training. This was a distraction. This was dangerous. Then he surrendered. He tangled his hand in her hair, pulling her closer. He kissed her back with a hunger that frightened him. It was a rebellion against the cold, against the Federation, against the probability of their death. In that kiss, they were claiming something for themselves, something the adjudicator could not sentence and the truth knights could not kill. He felt her heart hammering against his chest, matching the rhythm of his own. The desire was a physical ache, a sharp, sweet pain that made him forget the shrapnel in his side. Elena made a soft sound in her throat and pressed closer, her leg hooking over his. Seven lifted his head. He let out a low, rumbling growl, not of aggression, but of warning. Marcus broke the kiss. He rested his forehead against Elena's, both of them gasping for air. "We stop," Marcus whispered, his voice rough. Elena kept her eyes closed, her hand gripping his shirt. "Why?" "Because if we start this, I won't be able to focus on keeping you alive. And I intend to keep you alive." Elena opened her eyes. They were wet, shining with unshed tears. "You're a stubborn idiot." "I know." She buried her face in his neck again. She did not move away. If anything, she held him tighter. Marcus stroked her hair, staring up at the alien lights. He felt more connected to her in that moment of restraint than he would have in any act of passion. They had crossed the line. They were no longer partners. They were something else. Something that had everything to lose. "I lied to you," Elena said suddenly, her voice muffled against his skin. "About what? The peaches? About who you are?" "My name is Rostova, but I'm not just from a wealthy family. My uncle is Valerius Rostova." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Valerius Rostova was the High Counselor of the Interior. He was the architect of the loyalty laws. He was the man who signed the death warrants for entire planets. "The counselor is your uncle?" Marcus asked. Elena nodded against him. "He raised me after my parents died. He wanted me to be like him, cold, efficient. He put me in the science division because he thought I could build better weapons for his wars. And instead, you stole his wolf." "I found out what the wolf program really was," Elena said. "It wasn't for defense. It was for domestic control. They wanted to put a pack of these things in every city to hunt down dissidents. When I confronted him, he told me that morality was a luxury for the weak. He disowned me. He erased my clearance." She looked up at him. "That's why the bounty is so high. It's not just about the data, Marcus. It's personal. I'm a loose end, a stain on the Rostova family honor. He won't stop until I'm dead." Marcus tightened his arm around her. "Then he's going to be disappointed." He looked at the wolf. Seven was watching them, his head cocked to the side. "We're going to finish this, Elena. We're going to take that data to the core systems, and we're going to burn your uncle's legacy to the ground." "How?" Elena asked. "We have no ship. We're stuck in a dome on an ice ball." Marcus pointed to a console on the far wall of the dome. It was dark, covered in frost. This was a research outpost. They had to send their data somewhere. If there's a transmitter, we can use it. The storm broke 2 hours later. Marcus, moving stiffly but fueled by the nutrient pace and determination, pried the panel off the communications console. "It's dead," he said. "The power couplings are corroded." Elena was scanning the schematics of the facility on her wrist computer. "There's a relay station," she said, 3 miles north. It's a deep space broadcast hub. It sits on a geothermal fault line. If the core is still active, it could have enough power to punch a signal through the interference. 3 miles on foot, Marcus said. "In this weather." Seven barked, standing by the airlock. "He thinks we can make it," Elena said. They geared up. Marcus checked his blaster. 2 charge packs left. He checked the field cutter. It was at 50%. They stepped out into the night. The wind had died down to a manageable howl. The snow was packed hard and slick as glass. They moved in a tight formation, Seven leading, breaking the trail. The walk was brutal. Every step sent a jolt of pain through Marcus's side. He leaned heavily on Elena, who supported him without complaint. They reached the relay station as the twin moons of Nibelheim were rising. It was a massive structure, a spire of black metal jutting out of the ice like a spear. At its base was a cavernous entrance leading underground. They descended into the dark. The air here was warmer, smelling of sulfur and ozone. They reached the central control room. In the center of the chamber was the core, a pulsating sphere of ancient alien technology that the Federation had built the station around. It hummed with a low throbbing frequency. Elena rushed to the control interface. "It's dormant," she said, her fingers flying over the dusty keys. "I need to jumpstart the ignition cycle." She began rerouting power. Marcus stood guard at the entrance, his weapon raised. He had a bad feeling. The silence was too deep. Suddenly, the core flared to life. A wave of blue energy rippled out from the sphere. It was not radiation. It was something else. Seven, who had been pacing nervously, suddenly stopped. He threw his head back and let out a sound that was not a howl, but a harmonious tone that matched the hum of the core. "What is he doing?" Marcus asked. Elena looked at the readings. Her eyes went wide. "The core? It uses binaural frequencies. It's reacting to 7. The blue wave expanded, passing through the walls of the station. Outside, in the darkness of the ice ridges, the local wildlife, predatory snowstalkers with 6 legs and razor claws, had been gathering, scenting blood. But as the wave hit them, they stopped. They did not attack. They lay down in the snow, chittering softly, soothed by an overwhelming projection of calm. "He's amplifying his empathy field," Elena whispered. "He's broadcasting peace." It was beautiful. It was a miracle. And it was a beacon. Marcus saw the motion tracker on his wrist ping. "Contact," he shouted. Multiple signals. Fast movers. The roar of engines echoed down the tunnel. Federation hunters. They burst into the chamber. 3 skimmers piloted by armor trackers. These were not standard troops. They wore the gray cloaks of the Rostova House Guard. "Take them alive," the lead hunter shouted, his voice amplified. "The counselor wants the girl." Marcus opened fire. His first shot took the lead skimmer in the intake turbine. It spun out, crashing into the wall in a shower of sparks. 7 roared. The calm was gone, replaced by a terrifying protective fury. The wolf leaped, clearing 20 feet in a single bound, knocking a hunter off his bike. "Elena, get the broadcast." Marcus yelled, ducking behind a pillar as laser fire chewed up the stone. "I need time." Marcus popped up, firing 2 controlled bursts. Another hunter went down, but more were coming. He could hear the heavy thrum of a troop transport landing on the surface above. "We're out of time." Marcus shouted. He looked at the core. It was glowing brighter, destabilized by the fighting. 7, Marcus called out. The wolf disengaged from the hunter, leaving the Mun terrified but alive. He bounded back to Marcus. "Elena, the tunnels." Marcus pointed to a maintenance shaft behind the core. They scrambled into the narrow passage just as the chamber filled with gray-cloaked soldiers. They ran. The tunnels were a maze of steaming pipes and slick metal. They could hear the hunters pursuing, their boots heavy on the grating. "We're trapped," Elena gasped, clutching her side. "This tunnel loops back to the hangars." "Exactly," Marcus said. They burst out of the tunnel onto a landing ledge. Below them, on the main landing deck, sat the Federation frigate that had dropped the hunters. It was a Valkyrie-class interceptor, heavily armed, fast, and currently unguarded because the entire squad was chasing them in the tunnels. Marcus smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. 7, can you make that jump? The wolf looked at the ship, 30 feet below. He looked at Marcus. He growled a yes. Elena looked terrified. "We're jumping," Marcus said, grabbing her hand. "We're flying." They leaped. For a second, they were weightless. Then they slammed onto the hull of the frigate. Marcus rolled, absorbing the impact, pulling Elena with him. 7 landed with a heavy metallic clang. They scrambled for the top hatch. Marcus blew the lock with his last charge pack. They dropped into the cockpit. Marcus slid into the pilot's seat. It was a military craft, far more complex than a courier ship, but Marcus knew it. He had flown these in the war. The hunters burst onto the ledge above, firing down at the ship. Too late, Marcus muttered. He engaged the thrusters. The frigate roared to life, the afterburners incinerating the hunters on the ledge. The ship shot up the shaft, smashing through the ice doors of the surface and rocketing into the storm. Marcus pulled back on the yoke, punching through the atmosphere in seconds. The sensors lit up. 2 cruisers were in orbit, blocking the vector. "Hold on," Marcus said. He did not try to outrun them. He turned the ship directly toward them, accelerating to attack speed. "What are you doing?" Elena screamed. "Playing chicken," Marcus said. He armed the photon torpedoes but did not fire. He flew straight down the throat of the blockade. At the last possible second, the cruisers blinked. They broke formation to avoid a collision. Marcus punched the hyperdrive. The stars streaked into lines of light. Silence returned to the cockpit. Elena unbuckled and leaned over the console, breathing hard. Seven was pacing in the back, adrenaline still coursing through him. Marcus checked the NAV computer. "We're clear." He looked at Elena. Her face was smudged with grease and blood. Her hair a disaster. She looked beautiful. "Where are we going?" she asked. Marcus set the coordinates. "The inner systems. The capital." He looked at her, his eyes hard. "You said your uncle wants a war. Let's go give him one." The capital city of Iridia was not sleeping. It was seething. The entire planet had been turned into a stage for the Unity Summit, the annual extravaganza where the Federation patted itself on the back for another year of crushing dissent and expanding borders. The skyline was ablaze with gold and crimson holographic banners, and the air traffic lanes were choked with the luxury yachts of planetary governors, arms dealers, and the sycophants who fed on the scraps of power. Marcus Valerius piloted the stolen Valkyrie frigate into the heavy commercial descent lane. The ship had been hastily modified. The military transponder was masked, broadcasting a fake ID that identified them as a catering transport for the High Council's banquet. "We're entering the net," Marcus said, his hand steady on the yoke. Beside him, Elena Rostova was applying a layer of synthetic skin to her fingertips to fool the bioscanners. She looked terrifyingly composed. She wore a stolen dress uniform of a fleet admiral's aide, stiff and severe. "Are the upload packets ready?" Marcus asked. Elena nodded, not looking up. "The data is sequestered, but we're not just dumping the files." "Marcus, we agreed." Marcus sighed. He looked back at Subject 7. The massive wolf was standing in the center of the cargo hold, draped in a shimmering, semi-translucent fabric. It was a military-grade hollow cloak projecting the image of a floating anti-grav luggage pallet stacked with crates of vintage wine. "We agreed to a plan that has a 90% chance of getting us killed," Marcus said. "A surgical reveal is safer. We upload the evidence of the false flag operation. We show the wolf is sentient. And we leave. We let the public connect the dots." "The public doesn't connect dots, Marcus," Elena said, finally looking at him. Her eyes were hard. "They watch the show. If we just dump data, the Ministry of Information will spin it. They'll call it deepfake. They'll say it's terrorist propaganda. We have to give them something they can't spin. We have to give them a moment of undeniable truth. And that requires us to be in the room." "Marcus, it requires us to look them in the eye," Elena corrected. The comms panel buzzed. "Unidentified transport. This is Unity Control. Transmit clearance codes." Marcus keyed the mic. "Unity Control. This is Transport Alpha 9 carrying vintage reserves for Minister Varkas. We're running late due to ion storms in the outer rim." There was a pause, a long static-filled silence. "Alpha 9, you are clear for docking Bay 4, but be advised security protocols are at level crimson. Any deviation from your flight path will result in immediate vaporization." "Understood," Marcus said. He cut the channel. "We're in." Docking Bay 4 was a cavern of polished marble and gold leaf. It did not look like a hangar. It looked like a cathedral dedicated to the worship of combustion. They descended the ramp. Marcus wore the gray livery of a service droid handler, his face obscured by a rebreather mask. He pushed the anti-grav pallet that was secretly a 300-pound apex predator. Elena walked ahead, clutching a datapad, projecting an aura of hairy bureaucratic authority. The security checkpoint was a farce of pageantry over practicality. A line of Federation guards stood in ceremonial armor that was too heavy for combat, but perfect for parades. They were stopping every entrant, but not to check for weapons. One guard, a man with a mustache waxed to needle points, stopped Elena. "Halt!" he barked. He held up a measuring tape. "Your sash, Lieutenant. It appears to be 2 millimeters out of regulation width for a level 4 aide." Elena stopped, blinking. "My sash." "It's a violation of uniform code," the guard said, sniffing disdainfully. "The Emperor demands perfection." Elena stared at him. She was carrying enough encrypted data to topple the government, and behind her was a genetically engineered wolf capable of tearing a tank apart disguised as wine. And this one was worried about her sash. "My apologies, Sergeant," Elena said, her voice dripping with false contrition. "I had to make emergency repairs to my uniform after a toast mishap with the minister." The guard narrowed his eyes, then waved her through with a sigh of immense burden. "Fix it before the broadcast. We can't have sloppy hems on the global feed." They walked past the metal detectors. The scanner swept over the floating pallet. "Wait," the guard said. Marcus froze. His hand drifted toward a concealed blaster in his waistband. The guard peered at the scanner screen. "This wine, it's reading a high thermal output." Marcus improvised. "It's the Hyperion vintage, sir. It has to be kept at body temperature, or the fermentation destabilizes. Very volatile. If I open it, it might explode." The guard's eyes went wide. He knew better than to ruin the minister's wine. "Move along," he shouted, waving them away frantically. So quickly, they hurried into the lift. As the doors closed, Seven let out a low, muffled growl from beneath the hollow cloak. "Everyone's a critic," Marcus muttered. The lift deposited them in the backstage labyrinth of the Unity Arena. The air here vibrated with the sound of 1,000 servers humming in the walls. They were close to the nerve center of the Federation. The plan was simple in its insanity. The Unity Summit was being broadcast from the Grand Observation Deck, a suspended platform overlooking the gathered masses. To get there, they had to pass through the server sanctum, the cooling chamber for the massive broadcast arrays. They moved through the corridors, avoiding the patrols of elite True Knights. Elena led them to a heavy blast door marked Authorized Technicians Only. She used a slicer spike to override the lock. They slipped inside. Rostova drew a pistol from his robes. He aimed not at Elena, but at the wolf. "If the beast dies, the signal dies," Rostova screamed. He fired. Marcus saw the weapon level. He saw the flash. "No." Marcus threw himself in front of Seven. The bolt hit Marcus in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell hard to the deck. "Marcus." Elena screamed. Seven let out a sound that shattered the windows of the observation deck. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated grief and rage. The wolf turned toward a VIP box. He crouched, muscles coiling to spring. He could clear the distance. He could tear Rostova apart. "Seven, no." Elena yelled, rushing to Marcus's side. "Don't kill him. If you kill him, you prove them right." The wolf froze. He looked at Rostova, who was preparing to fire again. He looked at Elena, who was pressing her hands over Marcus's wound. The wolf made a choice. He turned his back on the man who wanted to kill him. He walked over to Marcus and knelt. He curled his massive body around the fallen soldier and the weeping woman, creating a living shield against the world. He looked up at the camera drones. His eyes were clear. He was not a weapon. He was a witness. The image was beamed to 12 star systems. A wolf protecting a human, refusing to kill. Rostova fired again, but the shot deflected off the wolf's armored shoulder plating. Then the feed cut. The screens went black. Regain control. Rostova screamed into his comms. Shut down the grid. But it was too late. In the streets below, the silence broke. It started as a murmur, then a shout, then a roar. The people had seen the truth. They had seen the monsters in the high tower and the humanity in the beast. A barrier crashed. A riot squad threw down their shields. In the server sanctum, a group of young technicians saw the kill order come through for the observation deck. They looked at each other. They looked at the block feed. One of them, a girl with blue hair, typed a command. "Rooting," she said, boosting the signal through the emergency channels. The screens flickered back to life. "You can't stop the signal." A voice hacked over the speakers. The city erupted. On the stage, the Truth Knights lowered their weapons. They looked at Rostova, then at the wolf. They backed away. Elena looked up. Marcus was conscious, grimacing in pain. "Did we win?" he whispered. Elena looked at the riot starting in the plaza. She looked at her uncle fleeing the VIP box as his own guards turned on him. She kissed Marcus's forehead. "We started a fire, Marcus. Now we just have to survive the burn." The wolf threw his head back and howled, a song of victory that was picked up by every speaker in the city. The anthem of the new revolution. The capital of Iridia had ceased to be a city and had become a wound. In the 48 hours since the broadcast of the Unity Summit, the metropolis had fractured down the middle, a jagged line drawn not by geography, but by belief. On the high walkways of the upper districts, loyalist militias clad in the Emperor's gold patrol with nervous fingers on triggers, calling for the heads of the traitors. Down in the industrial sectors and the transit veins, the resistance was no longer a whisper. It was a roar. They wore gray armbands, the color of a wolf, and painted the symbol of a paw print over Federation crests. Marcus Valerius watched the city burn from the window of a diplomatic safe house. It was the extraterritorial residence of the Pleiades trade delegation, a neutral power that had granted them temporary asylum while the galaxy held its breath. His shoulder throbbed where the laser bolt had burned him, a dull, rhythmic ache that reminded him he was alive. He turned away from the glass. The room was quiet, filled with the hum of air scrubbers and the soft clicking of Elena Rostova's nails on a datapad. She sat at a glass table surrounded by legal scrolls and holographic precedents. Subject 7 lay on a rug beside her, his massive head resting on his paws, his eyes tracking Marcus's movements with a calm amber intensity. "We can't stay here," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "The trade delegation is nervous. They won't hold the door if the Federation guard brings a siege ram." Elena did not look up. "We're not staying, Marcus. We're leaving tomorrow." Marcus walked over to the table. He looked at the maps of the smuggling route she had open on a side screen. "I can,